Welcome everybody to the Spotlight series. This is the Sunday show. I'm Zach Ritter. Remember, communityworksinstitute.org is where all the information is, and Community Works Institute, or CWI, sponsors these shows, and they do professional development for K through 16 educators. So if you are a K through 16 educator, you got to check out CWI's website. I've gone and taught at their winter institute, and they're coming up with a summer institute, and so definitely check out their professional development opportunities. Community Works Institute connects the classroom to the community with storytelling and ethnography, and Joe Brooks is just a really cool guy who is the director of the nonprofit. So I am Zach Ritter. I'm a Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And I also do, in my past life, was a Dean of Diversity at Harvey Mudd and Claremont Colleges and University of Redlands. And our guest today, I met, I think it was at NASPA or when?
Yeah, it was at AERA.
Oh, it was ARA in Toronto?
In Toronto, while we were both graduate students at UCLA.
I had more black hair at that time. No, I was just.
We had a lot of curly hair. I like your curls though. Yeah, I always like it when you grow your hair out and it's curly.
See, I like it, but then other people are like, it's not professional. And I'm like,
no, I think it's fun. I love curls.
See, then I got to bring them back.
Yeah, you had to bring it back.
Dr. Harvin is with us from Cal State Stanislaus, and she is a professor there in the psych department. But you have a whole bunch, you have a lot of different other hats that I want to hear about. And I'm looking at all your publications, and you are doing the damn thing. I'm very impressed. I want to grow up to be like you one day. So tell the viewers who you are and what you're doing.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Ritter, for that introduction. So yes, I am an associate professor of psychology at California State University, Stanislaus. Prior to my associate professorship, I was an assistant professor of child development, actually, and psychology at Cal State Stanislaus. So I really love what I do. I love all the classes that I teach. I teach courses in psychology, human development, and I always have a social justice focus with everything I talk about in the classrooms. So when my students leave my classes, they definitely, have hopefully adopted, or they're considering this social justice lens in which to view the world. In addition to being a professor, which I love, I am also a global teacher educator. So I go to other countries and engage in humanitarian work. Typically, I'm working with teachers and just everything related to education. As long as I can educate children, who are a part of vulnerable communities, then I feel like I'm doing my job. In addition to that, I'm trying to think of all the different hats, because you said I wear a lot of hats, and I do. I kind of like your show here, Dr. Ritter. I have my own show is called Transformative Conversations for Promoting Equity and Inclusion in Education and Beyond. And so I'll provide you with that link so that if you and others want to view a lot of the different topics that I've been talking about, I've had a strong focus lately on anti-Black or confronting anti-Black racism. So it's just a lot of really great information, a lot of really great speakers who I've been talking to a lot of great scholars. And I think that would be really informative for so many people. And so, yes, you, Dr. Ritter, you were on my show, you were on my program in the fall. And so we had a really great conversation. And then we kept talking even after I stopped recording. So it was a very long session, but it was really good too. So yeah. And What else should I say? What else?
Well, it'll come out. It'll come out naturally as we flow here. So let's start with that. I think you and I talk a lot about anti-Black racism, what's going on in the higher ed institution. Uh, I don't know. Let's jump off there. Tell us about an interesting conversation you're having about anti-Black racism, either on your show or just, yeah, what's going on with that?
Well, I'll kind of talk about, well, because I have, this social justice lens and a racial justice lens, and all that I do. I think, like in June with the rest of the nation, right, and the rest of the world, um, you know, there, like, I know that like, my heart just broke, when I saw that video, um, of George Floyd, and learning about Breonna Taylor, just for me as a Black person, right, and understanding my own history, Black history, for me, you know, the way Black people are treated in this country, it's not new.
Mm,
I know it was kind of eye opening for so many other people, which I'm glad about, but it wasn't new. You know, it's just kind of exhausting, as a Black person to constantly be fighting for equity, to be fighting for inclusion. And then it is traumatic, to see a video like what we saw of George Floyd, right? It's just very traumatic for those of us watching it, as well as I'm sure the family members who had to witness that as well. And so, anyways, I knew that there was something that I wanted to do to address what was going on and to also express my feelings about it. And that's when I approached my grant team. So I have a National Science Foundation grant,
mm,
and uh, the grant program that I have is called Ciencia. And so it's a program that I have with 5 other faculty members in my College of Science on my campus at Stan State. And so I remember approaching them, and we were all just in shock with what we had seen, and everyone just had just mixed feelings.
mm,
And I said, I really would like to write a statement in support of the Black community
mm,
here on my campus, and then just outside of the campus too. I just wanted to write a statement, and so everyone was on board with it. And I did. I led, the vision and led the writing on
mm.
the statement, and then I put it out there. And I had colleagues who did contribute, so it was really great to have the support of my colleagues too when writing something like that. And I just wrote from the heart.
Mm,
And
mm,
then that statement, and people can view that statement too. That's something I can also post if anyone wants to read it.
mm,
But it also had critical questions in it for people to consider.
mm.
And I brought those critical questions up in the program that I had, that I asked you to participate in, Zach.
Yeah,
Um, but then also, um, there were, um, my colleagues and I, we wanted to list what we plan to do
right,
as a program in
right.
order to address what's happening. And so, anyways, following that, um, and the circulation of it on my campus and outside of my campus as well, I decided to put on the larger training that I did, that 2-day training
Mm,
that I asked you to be a part of. There were a lot of really great speakers like Dr. Ivory Tolson,
mm,
Dr. Tyrone Howard, Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza, Dr.
mm,
Reynolds, DeLeon Gray, just so many,
mm.
wonderful scholars. I didn't name everyone. Sorry if I didn't name everyone. You know who you are. I love you. But I'm just trying to keep just try to keep time in mind here. But just so many wonderful scholars participated, and I uh, was just really excited about it. And the program gained national attention. There were global attendees, and this just showed me how many people were searching for knowledge on how
Mm.
to confront anti-Black racism on college campuses.
So,
And so, yeah.
so let's go there because I think a lot of viewers would like to know how to do that because they're sometimes at loss of what to do. But Emmett Till was, murdered in 1955, right? So uh, if white folks didn't know before, you knew then, right? So what? And maybe this is an unfair question, but like, why do dominant groups need to keep being reminded that Black people are getting killed by the state, and our tax dollars are going towards Black people getting killed?
Let's have a conversation about it, Zach, because you and I talk a lot, so I know that you have you have a lot to say about this too. I honestly, I do find it to be quite honest with you, frustrating, to constantly have to remind people, Black people are being discriminated against. We're being treated in unjust ways. Hello, like this is happening to me. It's real. I'm not delusional. And it's just this constant battle of having to fight, um, against people treating us like we're delusional. We're not delusional. Um, I know what racial discrimination feels like. I know what it smells like. I know what it looks like. And it's something I studied at UCLA too. It's like I study this. So if I'm experiencing it and I'm talking about it, I'm speaking up about it, it's important for my colleagues, my peers, just people around me to not question, the extent to which the discriminatory act actually happened. It's
Right,
just support me, validate my experiences. And
right.
so kind of and like you said, why does there always have to be a constant reminder? Well, that is a really good question because
Mhm.
um, Black people have been in this country for a very long time, like centuries. So it's not like we just arrived 50 years ago. We've been here for a very long time. And when you think about white supremacy, and you think about white privilege, all of that is in relation to Blackness, right? So I was actually talking with a colleague and a good friend, and we were talking about how there's this continuum, if you will, in this country, right? When we think about the caste system, and I know you and I have talked about like the caste system before. So when you think of like the caste system, you have Black and you have white, right? And so the closer you are, to this end over here, right, of the spectrum, or the continuum, where you're white, you're considered white, or you're fair in skin color, then there are going to be a lot of opportunities that are afforded to you, right? Because that's how this country was set up. And if you're Black, or the closer you are over here, right, when it comes to the spectrum or the continuum, you're closer to Blackness, right? Or you are Black, and so there are going to be more challenges and barriers. And so when we think about, like, we really have to think about white supremacy, right? And how white supremacy came about, and we have to keep in mind that whiteness is in direct opposition to Blackness. And so everyone else, when we think of that caste system, that spectrum or that continuum, they kind of fall in between, right? You fall somewhere along that continuum. And so for me, I honestly do think, it's unfortunate that as Black people, we constantly have to remind people, there's this, continuum. We're being discriminated against. Whiteness is in opposition to Blackness. And when I know, even sometimes in my classes, when I was first talking about white privilege, I would have students who, and a number of my white students where I teach right now, who would say, no, like I don't have white privilege, and just not where I teach now. There's another institution that I taught at where my white students would go, no, I don't have privilege. No, what are you talking about? Like, I work just as hard as everyone else. And I always tell them, I know you work hard. I see how hard they work. It's like, you do work hard. You work just as hard as everyone else. But let's break this down so you really understand, the broader scope, of white privilege and what that really means for not only, people who are white, but for everybody else,
Mhm.
right? So I don't know if I really answered your
Yeah,
question.
no, yeah, no. I think you did. And so, if an administrator or a K through 16 educator is listening, and they're empathetic to what we're talking about. And they're like, I'm down with Black and brown rights. I go to the protests. I put my money in Black-owned banks. I speak up when I can in meetings. What else can I do in order to create change, whether it be individual or systemic, uh, at my institution or in my classroom? Like, what do you say to those folks who are like, I want to do something, I want to create change? What would you say to them?
You have to start with your policies and, procedures, your practices. That, I mean, honestly, that's that's really what it comes down to, as well as just changing the culture, right? So just because you as an individual walk into a meeting and you're like, I'm going to be vocal, I'm going to stand up for everybody, you know, that's great. Guess what? We need more people like that. Okay. So please keep doing that. Because trust me, it's nice to have the support in meetings, right? But and then you're walking down the hallway and you're like, I'm going to talk to everybody, I'm going to be inclusive with what I'm doing. You go into the classroom, or you go into your office and you're like, okay, these are the ways I'm going to be inclusive, and all of that is great. I actually want people to continue to do that, but just because you're doing that doesn't mean all of your other colleagues are doing that, right? So in order to change the culture in your institution, you have to start with the policies, right? You have to start, really taking a deep dive, and conducting a review to look at, okay, what are our policies? What are our typical practices and procedures? And once you kind of can identify, well, what's healthy and what's not, right? What's equitable and what's not, then you can really start changing
Hmm.
uh, what's going on. So that's really what it is.
Hmm.
And if people can change these larger practices, these policies, they can change the culture of their institutions.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think folks have tried stuff like cluster hires, right, where they hire several queer folks or several Black and brown folks at the same time, so that these faculty members don't get burnt out and leave the institution from racial battle fatigue, imposter syndrome, all the things. Um, a lot of these institutions I've heard, as I've worked there, well, Black and brown faculty just don't apply here, or we're not that type of place. And you know, we're doing well on the student side and admitting a lot of Black and brown students, but we just can't get Black and brown folks on the board of trustees or on the upper echelons, or or our president is Black, but the rest of the institution is not equity centered or progressive. Um, how Let's talk about curriculum, and then I want to talk about your career. But curriculum, what can, well, actually, I'll open it up. Curriculum or something kind of nerdy on the administrative side, I'll let you decide. What would you say in terms of someone's like, I want to do some curricular change to my class? What would you say? Or if someone was like, I want to do some administrative change, what would you do?
Mhm. Well, I guess I can start with curricular change, because that's something that I'm actually um, pushing right now. That's part of the grant that I have, the National Science Foundation grant. So the grant that I have, as an example, it's all about culturally relevant, culturally sensitive pedagogical practices. And so every year, my colleagues and we work with a small number of faculty members, usually about 15 um, faculty members in the College of Science. And they attend our summer institute, our winter institute. They're engaged in year-long programming, and it's all about um, you know being more equitable, right? In your classroom, being more inclusive, um, really thinking about your curricular materials. Do they speak to all of your students, right? So something that I know, I held a workshop um, with another colleague, and it was for our entire College of Science, and other people outside the College of Science on my campus could attend as well. They can always attend our programs. But something that, I often do, another one of my colleagues does too, and we encourage everyone else to do it, is I give my students a self-assessment,
Mm,
right? And this is part of one of the workshops too. So I give them a self-assessment. So at the beginning of the semester, actually my semester just started, so I was uploading the self-assessments yesterday.
mm,
But what I do is I ask students critical questions, just about themselves. I definitely let them know this is information for me to have. But, anyways, I'm asking them lots of different questions because I want to get to know who they are. I also have one on one meetings with my students. Even if I have a big class with 40 students, I know that can seem overwhelming, but I find that to be really helpful to have those one on one meetings so I can get to know my students. They can get to know me. I feel like that creates a really good rapport with students as well. But anyways, I'll engage in these individual meetings, and I'll give students these self assessments
mm,
so that I can learn about my students, and that actually helps me to shape the class. So I keep that information in mind. So if I have 75% of my students saying we're working full time, okay, well, I know I need to be even more flexible, right? In various ways with my students. If I have a number of students, because my institution we have a lot of non-traditional students. So if I have a lot of students who may have families, right? Again, flexibility comes in there as part of being inclusive, right? I know that I did have some pushback from some faculty, like when it came to exams, us being online right now, where they were like, "Well, we want to monitor students and make sure they're taking exams." And I was like, "Nah, that can be really tricky because what some faculty wanted to do was to have timed exams. So, like at 11 a.m. on this day, you need to be here for your final exam, for instance." And it's like, well, you know, is everyone able to, especially with us being online right now, right? There may be students who can't be on at that time, or what if there's computer issues, or what if, we know that there are lots of different issues. And when I say we, educators, we know that there are lots of different issues associated with being online now. With synchronous teaching and asynchronous. And it's interesting because asynchronous teaching is considered to be more inclusive, more
mm,
equitable, actually, than synchronous.
mm.
But the synchronous, like what we're doing right now, we're here at the same time in this virtual space and we're talking. This is great. I love doing this with my students, but I still have students, even though I started this week or this past week, I have students who are like, I can't make it because of work, or I can't make it because, I have to take care of my children and there's no one who can watch them. And so I have to be flexible as an instructor. And so I think, like I said, the self-assessment, the individual meetings, that can help you to learn who your students are very quickly at the beginning of the semester so that you can think about how you want to create
Mm.
an environment that's flexible. So I know I keep saying the word flexible, but being flexible is part of having an inclusive classroom environment. So those are just like two ways
Yeah.
that I try to get to know my students, but there's many other ways
Mm.
to create an inclusive curriculum. So I can definitely, well, if people want to know more, just contact me because I'm always holding workshops on this.
I like that.
So
And,
then
and
on the, oh, sorry.
yeah, yeah, no. So, right, going into the administrative side, um, the demands.org has a bunch of demands from around the country of students who want to see their institutions change. And they've been pretty consistent since like the 80s of we want more faculty of color. Uh, we
Yeah.
want more students that are from, racial and ethnic backgrounds. Um, and we want to have like psychologists on campus that are not just all white. Um, and we want more money in the diversity center, and the diversity center to have more of a pull on campus. But there's a bunch of stuff. But what would you say administratively from some of the campuses that you've been at? Um, where do we have to go? Like, how do we get more faculty of color? Like, how do we do these? How do we get the board of trustees to be more diverse?
Right. So these are really great questions. You know what? Okay, so I'm like, where do I start? You
Yeah.
know, some campuses are better than others,
Right.
right? With recruiting diverse faculty members, diverse staff, with trying to work to have a somewhat diverse board of trustees. But I, at least when it comes to, you know, what's directly happening on campus, I know for me, you know, I definitely try to be on search committees. I remember when I would always be on different search committees, and I'd be on those committees purposely because I was like, you know, I want to really make sure that we are recruiting a really great diverse pool of educators for, you know, whatever position we were looking at the time. And by bringing in all these amazing people, now we have a range of people, you know, who are excellent that we can choose from. And I've heard that argument too. Just, you know, on, it depends on what campus you're on, right? Like I said, some campuses are just better than others with recruiting a lot of diverse people. Like I'll walk onto certain campuses and I'm blown away and so excited. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so great to see so much diversity here.
Mm.
And there's other campuses you walk onto and it's like, what's happening here? You know, like there's no diversity, but but your student body is diverse. So what's
Right.
going on? And so you're right. There's the argument of, you know, people of color don't want to come here. And of course, when I'm talking about diversity, I know it goes beyond people of color. So I'm just using people of color as an example. But for instance, I'll talk about Black people. You know, I'll hear at particular institutions, you know, we can't recruit Black people because Black people don't want to come to this institution. They don't want to live in this area. They, you know, if they do come here, they leave very quickly and we don't know why. We don't know what's going on. And it's interesting because it's like, well, you know, you have to think about if you are truly going to recruit, let's say people of color, for instance, or Black people to your campus, um, you know, you have to have the campus needs to be set up in a way where it's safe for them, right? Where they feel this sense of belonging. So yeah, if someone leaves, it's honestly it's probably because they got a better offer somewhere else at an institution that may be a safer place for them than where they're at, and a place that where they're not experiencing a lot of microaggressions, or they're not being discriminated against on a daily basis. Yeah, you know, they're going to want to leave and they're going to want to go somewhere else. Or maybe there's an institution that sees their excellence, their talent, and says, hey, we're going to recruit you and we're going to make sure we set things up to where you are thriving here at this institution. So I think for a lot of institutions that are always saying, oh, you know, we have a hard time recruiting, you know, diverse staff and diverse faculty. I think they really need to do a look, you know, an internal look at their own practices and policies and culture to see, is this a toxic culture? Because if it's a toxic culture, trust me, it's gotten out. People know.
Yeah.
And and people are going to avoid that institution because it's toxic. There's an institution I have in my mind right now that I I know about what happened to a good number of Black people on that campus, and there were Black professors who made sure people knew about it. And that is one campus I will never like want
Mm.
to go to because of the reputation that it has for really just not supporting Black people. And there were some really harmful things that were done, some really toxic things that occurred. And so that's just, I mean, it's an institution I hope that is changing its culture. I was recently informed that they're trying to now, which is good. But, you know, we have to set up safe spaces.
Right.
And then also when it comes to these committees where we're recruiting, so whenever you hear, oh, we're not recruiting enough people of color, or just, you know, people who are diverse in various ways.
Right.
And the question is always, well, where are you recruiting? Like,
Yeah.
where are you advertising these job announcements, right? If you're advertising in the same
Yeah.
places, then you're going to get the same people and we're going to have the same problem. But if you start advertising on different listservs, you know, there are, so getting back to Black people, I'm talking about Black people, I'm Black. You know, there are HBCUs, hello, historically Black colleges and universities. And what's interesting, I'm going to say something to you, Zach. What's interesting, so there are people who actually do not know about HBCUs.
Wow.
There are people who do not know about historically um, Black colleges and universities, and so sometimes, so I find myself educating people on it. There are ways to advertise, right?
Mhm.
With those institutions, if you want to, recruit um, Black excellence, and Black excellence is everywhere.
Mhm.
But I'm saying if you are finding yourself having a hard time somehow, not recruiting
Mhm.
Black people to your institution, you have to start thinking about where are you trying to recruit them from, and are you really trying at the end of the day,
Mhm. Mhm.
I question that too.
Right.
You really trying? Or one last thing, Zach, when a Black person does come to the campus, right? Like I was saying, is it a safe space for them, right? Can they thrive or is it toxic?
Mhm.
And when it comes to staff, right? Staff have a different voice than faculty, right? So we need to talk about that too. So as a faculty member, there's uh, being able to speak out and speak my mind, is a privilege,
Mhm.
right? That a lot of staff members don't feel that they are afforded.
Mhm.
So even if you do have diverse staff members, they may not even want to speak out, even if the culture is toxic, because they'll be afraid of losing their job. And if they do speak out, then they may lose their job. Unfortunately, I have seen people who have, I mean, excellent people walk onto a campus. And because, they're social justice leaders, they speak out, they're gone,
Mhm.
And that is not right. I think that is very problematic and needs to be addressed. And then the narrative that usually surrounds that person is false. Oh, they didn't want to be here anymore. It just didn't work out. I don't know what happened to that person. No, you know what happened. We all know what happened to that person.
I mean, I was at institution and 12 staff people were gone overnight, and
Yeah,
everybody was just like, yeah, I don't know, I guess they're just reorganizing. And it's like,
right.
yeah,
Really? But when something like that happens, right? Something has gone down,
yeah,
and that's why people are being shifted around. It's kind of like let's get rid of the
yeah,
evidence almost.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
exactly. So okay, so let's back up real quick, and I want the listeners to learn about who you are, because you're doing all this dope work, and they should know who you are.
Thank you.
So, and there's some K through 12 educators who are on the session as well. So tell us a little bit about your K through 12 experience. Were there some teachers that really touched you, inspired you to get into psychology work, to get into racial justice work? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So Zach, something. I hmm. So I have to make this note. I think because I've been doing so much advocacy related to college students, and college faculty and staff, I think a lot of people think that is my only focus. And I do want to note that actually the majority of my research has been within K-12 schools. I have been focusing on what's going on at the college level because, I've been a college professor for almost, at least at my current institution, for almost 7 years now. And prior to that, even when I was at UCLA and I was a graduate student, I was always a lecturer at various Cal States. So I've been teaching for a really long time. And, but as of late, yeah, I've been focusing on what's happening at the college level because, like I said, I've been a professor for a long time and I've seen a lot. And I was like, there's a lot that needs to be addressed at this level, in terms of the culture on a campus and you know, uh, and in terms of, really fighting for racial equity and justice.
Mm,
So in thinking about my own K-12 experience, what even got me into becoming a professor, honestly, was my mom.
mm,
My mom and my dad, they are my best teachers, to be completely honest with you. 100% my best teachers. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for my parents.
mm,
So both of my parents, they're highly educated. They're Black, very proud Black people, and they are from the South. And so I grew up in California. So I was born and raised in California. And um, all throughout my K-12 education, um, both my parents always made sure my siblings and I were like ahead of the curve, so that's why I say, it was great to have that strong support from both of my parents throughout my education. And also, here's the thing, my parents were fierce supporters of me. They still are. So let me tell you what all that means and how this relates to racial justice. So my family and I, I grew up in a white suburb. So when I was really, really small, we were in a more diverse suburb, but then when I was about 5, we moved to a predominantly white suburb. So it was a white suburb. We were the only Black people. So we were the blockbusters, if you will. That's an actual term. So and so anyways, we moved into this neighborhood. It was a brand new neighborhood. And so all the families had young children. And so there were a lot of people that I just grew up with, we all went to the same schools, nearby schools. And so anyways, throughout my schooling, there would be times when I would experience racial discrimination. I hear of, because I conduct research within the K-12 system, and so a lot of Black students would talk about a great deal of experiences, right? I didn't have a great deal of experiences, with racial discrimination, but I had enough to
mm,
where I know what it feels like to be discriminated against as a young person, and so I remember my very first experience with um, racial discrimination was actually outside of the school context. It was at my um, house. And I remember, so my siblings and we used to always play with a little boy who was white. So we would always play with him. And then one day he just stopped coming around.
mm,
I'll never forget this. He just stopped coming around. And so one day we saw him walking and we called him over to our house and we were like, how come you don't come over anymore? How come you don't play with us? And we were really small. And he said something to the extent of his mom told him that he couldn't play with us anymore, or he couldn't play with us until his skin turned brown, something like that. So he had to have brown skin in order to play with us. And I remember at the time, my siblings and I did not know what that meant. Like, we honestly didn't know what that meant. We were just like, what does that mean? So we were like, so you can't play with us? And he was like, I don't think I can play with you. So he didn't even know what it meant. Like, we just didn't, none of us knew what that meant. And I remember going and talking to my parents about it. We were like, oh, this is what was said to us. My parents knew immediately what that meant. And that was actually my first time where my parents had to start engaging in racial socialization,
mm,
right? Like socializing my siblings and I to, understand our Blackness, like our skin, like what it means to have this beautiful brown skin. And my parents, they of course talked to this little boy's parents,
mm,
but that was just a taste, right? That was just like outside of school. But at school, there would be teachers who didn't it's like they would act like they didn't understand me. And for me, when I was young, I'm like, I'm a child just like everyone else. What do you mean you don't understand me? Why am I being treated differently than other people, right? Or my peers? Like, it just made no sense. It's like, how do you treat a Black child so differently than you treat all the white children in the classroom? It was just weird. So I would have white teachers that would make inappropriate comments. I remember one white teacher I guess we were talking about history. I'll never forget this. It was in fourth grade. See, I didn't have a ton of experiences, but I had enough where I remember that. So I was in fourth grade, Zach, and this teacher, she was actually my favorite teacher, is this white teacher. She was my favorite teacher. But one day in class, we were talking about history. And so she wanted to talk about slavery, right? And so I'm the only Black person in the class. And as she's talking about it, she said, okay, Aletha, she was like, she points me out in front of the entire class. I'll never forget it. And she said, how do you feel about slavery? And I'm in fourth grade, right? So she was like, how do you feel about slavery? And, your ancestors, having been slaves or something like that. And, now, I think about it, I'm like, okay, uh, let's use the word enslaved, like people were enslaved. But I at that point, I actually was being educated by my parents on my Black history. And so I said something back to her in front of the entire class, because I did remember I didn't like being put on the spot at that point. And so I did ask her about, I made some comment, or I asked her a question regarding like indentured servants. And I mentioned like, white people, and she got offended. She got upset. And so then she wanted me to go to the office, for the comment that I made. And I said, well, if you're going to ask me about this, then why don't we talk about indentured servitude as well, And so I think she was just shocked I brought it up. And so I remember my parents, the teacher, and we all had a meeting, and my parents were fierce in that meeting. So every time I had teachers who would discriminate against me, I'm raising my hand in class, sitting right in the middle, in the front of the classroom with my hand raised, and I'm not getting called on. All the white students who didn't even have their hands raised, right? They're getting called on, right? So just experiences like that constantly, And I would tell my parents, and my parents were always at the schoolhouse. They were always talking to the principal, always talking to the teacher. Like, my parents were fierce supporters of me and my siblings, and they always said, oh, no one's discriminating against you. That's not happening. And my parents, because they're educators, right? They understood the school system. They knew how to navigate it. So that was extremely helpful too. So even when I had school counselors who were, telling a lot of the students of color, trying to discourage us from going to college, I'm like, I come from an educated family. I'm going to college. And so my parents were like, yeah, you're going to college. And that was another issue to deal with, So in thinking of what you're saying about this fight for racial justice, social justice, I get that from my parents, to be honest with you. Like I said, it really, I grew up, my family and I, we grew up just really close, tight-knit family, Christian family. So one thing my parents always taught me, which is interesting, because, even with all my experiences with racism and discrimination, the one thing about me that I think is really important for people to understand is I always have a Christian approach to what it is that I do. And I know people don't like to talk about religion, but I'm proud to be a Christian. And so what do I mean by that, about my approach? Well, at the end of the day, I do believe, I just believe in loving people and caring about people and making sure that everyone feels included, right? And making sure that everyone feels that they belong. That's like, to me, it's a core Christian principle. And unfortunately, I do think Christianity has gotten a bad rap, just because of, I think, certain individuals and how they represent Christianity in the media. But for me, if you think about the core values of faith, of Christianity, it's about loving your neighbor. So, my parents always taught me that. So even in the midst of all this racism, discrimination, my parents would always say, like, love your neighbor, still care about people, still be a humanitarian. You want to still be a decent and good person. Don't let people turn you into, um, someone that you're not, right? So it's all about just love and caring for other people. And so I always just approach my work in that way, as well, and just wanting everyone to be successful. And so when it comes to children, or it comes to the K-12 education system, this fight for racial justice and social justice is extremely important. But I hope those experiences that I pointed out to you kind of, answered your question or
Mm,
addressed your question in some
good.
way in terms of where my fight comes from. It comes from my parents. My grit and my fight comes from my parents.
Mm, yeah. No, same, same. I'm just thinking about my own stuff. Yeah, right. Because yeah, our parents teach us so much.
And not all and not all young people, right, have parents, like, especially when I think of, when it comes to racial, like, racism and racial discrimination. Some young people, they don't have parents who really have that knowledge, to help socialize their children, right? Engage in racial socialization, or maybe they don't know how to protect their children within the school system. And so part of what I do with my work, I just don't make recommendations, right? Which I do. I do that. I make recommendations in my books or book chapters that I write, or in articles, but I also like to work with parents directly, and and just help them with navigating the educational system. Because if you don't know how to navigate the system, it's extremely easy for your children to fall through the cracks and fail and become another statistic. And I remember my parents always said, "You're not going to be another statistic. You're just not. Like, you're going to be successful, and we're going to ensure that that happens for you." So I always had like a fierce support system behind me. But I know that a lot of, there are a number of young Black people who don't have that same kind of fierce support system. And that's kind of what's driven my work too, is to understand, what that means. Like, how do young people who are still successful, young people of color, for instance, how are they still successful if they, when they don't have that kind of support system that I had, right? So how, like, what are those other factors that help them to stay resilient in the face of adversity and to still succeed?
Yeah. So tell us about that. About your teaching and your research in terms of K through 12, because there are K through 12 educators that are listening, and they are thinking, uh-oh, well, okay, I know I don't want to be that teacher that says something stupid and racist and puts a fourth grader on the spot about, well, what do you think about slavery and what did your people suffer, then that kind of typical thing. And you you were a smart fourth grader and you're like, well, what did you think about white indentured servitude?
Servitude. Yeah, that's exactly what I asked about white indentured servitude.
um, yeah, what did your people think of that? So tell us about your research in K through 12, and even about this, resiliency, and what can K through 12 educators do in order to help their Black and Brown students, excel.
Honestly, I know that's been a big thing too. When it comes to just confronting anti-Black racism, I'll have a lot of educators say, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing in the classroom. I don't want to offend anyone. And, I don't know everything about, Black people, or, BIPOC, the BIPOC community. Like, I don't know everything. So I'm just not going to say anything.
Right.
Right. And so that actually can be really dangerous, just not to say anything at all, or to recognize the diversity that exists among your students, right? So you want to recognize the different histories that your students bring into the classroom, the different backgrounds that they bring into the classroom. But you also, you don't want to put students on the spot in a way that um, that can be damaging to them. Luckily I had a strong support system, and I just went and complained to my parents about what happened. But, other young people, like another child who might be in that same position where that happens, and they don't know what to do, right? It sticks with you. Like, I still remember that very vividly today. Like, it just sticks with you. So I think it's important for educators to, you know, you bring up these sensitive topics that are needed to be brought up in the classroom. Don't shy away from it. Yes, you may not have all the language or the right language, to talk about these sensitive topics related to diversity and equity and white privilege and white supremacy, but you need to start having the conversation with your students in some way. And I wouldn't put any students on the spot. You can just ask open-ended questions and let anybody answer those questions, right? But you also need to monitor what is being said as well in the classroom. So when it comes to pedagogy, right, it's not about just, and and we have to really recognize how hard teachers work. Teachers work so hard. There is so much you have to keep in mind when you're in the classroom, especially if you want to be a really good teacher. You're monitoring everything that's happening while trying to teach, while doing this, so you're doing a lot. And when it comes to these discussions related to inclusion and equity, I would pose a lot of just open-ended questions. Let students thinking drive the discussion, let their opinions drive the discussion. Make sure that you are coming in and you are connecting what they're saying to what's in the text, right? And just be open to learning, but don't shy away from having these sensitive conversations, because your silence says something too, right? It communicates something. So for instance, with the murder of George Floyd, if you just walked into your classroom and did not recognize, everything that was happening in the world regarding, anti-Black racism, to not recognize that is to act as if it didn't happen, right? When you have students who may be in your classroom who are being affected by it, right? I remember when I was, this is when I was much younger. I remember I was volunteering in a classroom, and I was working with this, it was a fourth grade classroom, and I was working with this young Black male student. And it was a diverse classroom, and it was in a diverse neighborhood. And anyways, this young fourth grader, he kind of kept acting out, being really disruptive. And I would talk to the teacher about it and say, what's going on, And so she was like, yeah, I don't know what's happening with him. And so anyways, I started working with him one-on-one, right? And he liked art. I found out he liked art. So then we would do a lot of drawing and painting. And so anyways, as I continued to connect with him and bond with him, he started revealing some information to me, and something he talked about. One of the reasons, and it links perfectly with when he was kind of being disruptive and kind of acting out, was he watched his mom get killed. And so that's traumatic, right? Wow. And he didn't feel comfortable telling the teacher about it, but he felt comfortable telling me, someone who was just bonding with him. And so I guess I bring that up to also say, it is important to get to know your students, like I was saying before, and see what's going on with them. But we never know what students are dealing with, right? And when it comes to like all the murders that we see, for instance, in the country, here's this student who dealt with something similar, and he's in fourth grade, and he said his dad's not talking to him about it. No one's discussing anything with him. So he's just left to mourn the murder of his mother on his own, something he witnessed. And that is traumatizing. But then let's say he was in your classroom and you walk in and you say nothing about, what's going on, and you have no discussions about the killing of Black people, that student who actually witness his Black mother die is going to think you're totally tone deaf as an educator, right? And that you don't get it, and you're never going to get him. And then that could actually lead to a lack of motivation for him in the classroom. He doesn't feel you care. But if you come into that classroom and you can talk about very real issues that are going on in the world, and you can connect it, and trust me, you can connect it to your curriculum in one way or the other. Or maybe you're just having a discussion with the students right before you dive into your curriculum. But to not recognize what's happening in the world, especially when your students are being impacted by it, is to remain silent. That silence, that speaks volumes to students. And so you don't want to be a tone deaf instructor. You want to be a teacher who cares, and you just don't want to say you care. That's another thing. I care, about students. And I know teachers do care about students. None of us would get into this profession if we did not care about, the young people that we're teaching. So I know you care, but but there's lots of ways to demonstrate that you care, and by trying to be inclusive in the classroom, by trying to address larger issues and bringing them into the classroom, that's important. And one last note, I know that sometimes it can be tricky. I've seen it play out in the media before, where there's a K-12 teacher who's talking about white privilege and social justice, and then their jobs on the line all of a sudden, right? And students are protesting, and they don't want the teacher fired, but the teacher does get fired. And so that's another issue too that is not okay, right? For, our educators who are just trying to address uh, important issues in the classroom facing getting fired. Like, that's not okay. So again, this comes down to policy and procedure, and we need to address that. Like, we have to get at the heart of the issue.
Mm, 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 mm. No, totally. Because part of what you're, part of what a K through 12 or 16 educator is also doing is it's teaching and signaling to white students how to deal with these issues, you know, about whatever it is, queerness or black and brown issues, or police brutality, or um, you know, whatever, our prison system. There's all these things that there's kind of these messages that you get along the way of your K through 16 experience. And I'm just remembering that um, there was a lot of racial justice conversations that happened in my household because of the Holocaust and because of my grandma was a survivor. And there was a notion that we got killed in Europe. There are people getting killed right now in America, and we have to be fighting for and with them, or else our necks are on the line next. And I remember in kindergarten
Yeah.
and first grade, it was a lot of like white liberal teachers who were like trying to do the right thing. And it actually, I think they did something good, uh, because they had like guitar time or song time, and they were teaching us like, ain't gonna let Bull Connor turn me round, turn me right, and like a the tree that's standing in the water, we shall not be moved. So they were teaching us all these songs, but they weren't divorcing it from its history. So they were teaching us the song and straight up like holding up these cards or pictures, which were like the black and the white fountain, drinking fountain. And then like they were holding up the pictures of like the dogs, like, chewing on black people. Like they were not shying away from the ugly history, and they were educating us from a young age of like, oh, you like this song and you think it's catchy. Well, it's a liberation song because black people were getting tortured by white people. And so I think as a little kid, I would like talk to my parents about it, and they would reaffirm it, like, yeah, like this is what has been happening in this country, and it still happens. It's just morphed and evolved in a different way. And I think, yeah, from a young age, it was just like,
Mhm.
oh, so there's connectivity with what grandma is saying in like the concentration camps in Auschwitz, of like all these like rats eating people, and like American genocidal stuff. There's a connectivity. So I
Yeah.
think, I, I don't know. I some sometimes I worry that it's almost too late when we start doing racial justice in like 14th, 15th, 16th grade, when this stuff needs to be happening much younger.
And I agree with you. I think if it starts at an early age, like I said, I was learning about different cultural groups from my parents. So it was important. So for me, learning that information at an early age and then continuing to learn it, because we have a lot of books in our home, in our family home. So just, reading and talking as a family, and just having my parents educate me, it was information I wasn't getting at school. But I feel like that helped me to be even more empathetic than I already was to, different causes. And to this day, I'm very empathetic to a lot of different vulnerable groups and
Mhm.
populations. And I'm always trying to be a strong supporter. And I wanted to make one last note, in thinking about the classroom. I know that in all of my classes that I teach, and I know I teach at the college level, in all of my classes, I for the most part, I work really hard to address, whatever we're talking about, whatever the topic is. I try to always relate it to gender related issues, racial related issue or race related issues, excuse
Mm,
me, and just a number of different issues. And I
mm,
do that on purpose because like for instance, when it comes to child development classes, or psychology classes, I think, okay, how can you, in my mind, I'm like, how do you divorce, child development concepts from, these, from people's intersecting social identities, right? Or these different characteristics that they have. Like, how do you divorce all of that? And what's interesting is I know that there are people who do. There are people who do, and just like, well, we're just learning the theory and that's it. And it's like, okay, but I always have, I'm always like, okay, but every child is different. Like every family is different. And this theory, it's a great theory. It's totally a great theory. But it's like there's a lot of research surrounding that theory, and that should be brought into the classroom too. So I would say for all the teachers and educators who are listening, and going back to one of Zach's, Dr. Ritter's original questions, which is about curricular materials. Like, look at your curricular materials. Are they diverse? Are there different voices that are being advanced? Is it the same voice? A lot of times in our classes, it can be, especially in a lot of theory classes, it can be a lot of white male voices that are being promoted. And it's important to really diversify the voices that students are hearing from within the classroom. Otherwise, here we go again, we are ignoring the fact that there are so many people in the world who are not white and males. So we do need to have other perspectives and other voices in the classroom, and that accompany those texts as well. Because that information, like I think of John Piaget. John Piaget is amazing. So I like John Piaget's work. However, there is a lot of other research that surrounds his work that can speak to diverse groups of children and adolescents, and that also needs to be brought to bear on a conversation that you might be having with students about John Piaget's theory on cognitive development, right? There's a lot of really great work. So
Yeah, I remember learning Piaget, and you're right. Yeah, it's the foundational stuff is always dead white guys, which there's still value in that, but also, right, we need more voices to be centered as well, Black and brown voices and queer voices as well.
Yeah.
This was the fastest hour that has ever happened in the history.
Really, was it?
This was very quick.
It was a fast hour. I was looking at the time. I went, oh, wow, we hit an hour. But it was just, it was a good conversation.
No, it's fun. And I was taking down mental notes because I was learning stuff from you, as I always do. And so look, Dr. Harvin, thank you so much for being on the show. Hope we could stick around a little bit after, we could talk a little bit. For guests who are just tuning in or have been tuning in, this is Community Works Institute. Please check us out at communityworksinstitute.org. Again, CWI is a nonprofit that brings together the classroom and community, and they have professional development opportunities coming up always for K through 16 educators. So please check it out. And Joe Brooks, as always, I'm very indebted to you for putting together the Spotlight series. And Joe Brooks is the director of CWI, Community Works Institute. So thank you for letting me utilize this space. And Dr. Harvin, keep spreading the light, the love, and the education. And we got to make a better world because we know the history and we know the present is not so great, but we hope and pray and work that the future is going to be a different day. And thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.